All right, hey YouTube, how you doing? It's Max. In today's video, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about kind of compare and contrast confidence and arrogance. Um, these are kind of a couple of concepts that I think growing up, I was very, I would try to be confident, but sometimes I'd come off as arrogant. And sometimes I feel like, they're just kind of these two words that can be kind of easily mistaken for one another. So I kind of wanted to first talk about like an experience of mine in high school of like why this kind of became part of my life and how this has kind of impacted me. And hopefully at the end, kind of have this strategy of how I've kind of looking back at it, what I'm kind of doing in my life going forward to, um, I guess it'll make sense when I'm doing it, but or when I'm explaining it, but just kind of like how I've kind of, learned from these kinds of things, how I'm trying to be less arrogant and yeah. So in high school, I remember in PE, we had these like mini semesters where you would kind of break off from doing like your actual working out and you go into like this classroom setting and you learn about like health or like you do like driver's education and like sex education, stuff like that. And I remember normally in like sex education, I promise this relates to confidence and arrogance. Normally in sex education, they separate like the boys from the girls, that kind of stuff. But in this sex ed class, I remember we were all kind of in the same room. So I don't know if this was just normal health class or sex education health class, but I just remember we were all together. And I don't remember why this was an activity, but one of the activities was that the teacher would put all these different words and attributes on the board, and we were going to try to come up with, I guess, the uh, just words on the board that we found would find attractive in a partner. I guess maybe it was like some sort of like class on like dating for the right reasons or something in school. I don't really know, but it was pretty much like all the boys would try to come up with like top three words that they looked for in a partner, and all the girls would try to uh, come up with words that they found attractive in a partner. I don't know. I feel like this is a very outdated kind of lesson to be learned, but that's just what I remember it was. And I remember for both sides, boys and girls, everyone found that, they thought that confidence was a key word that everyone found attractive in, I guess, a potential partner. And I found this interesting because I personally didn't claim that confidence was something that I looked for in someone else. And I think this was because I personally didn't see myself as a confident person. And I guess in hindsight, I feel like a few high schoolers, probably didn't feel like they were confident either. But, and maybe that this was something, having confidence in their partner would in turn make them feel more confident. I'm not 100% sure. That's just my kind of in hindsight looking back at it. But I feel like a lot of people just in general aren't very confident in high school. So maybe this is just, something that we find attractive because it's something that we want to be, but it's not that we are at that moment. And I feel like in high school there's all these sort of it's like a time where you're trying to find yourself. So we're not going to naturally be confident people. There's a lot of milestones, first time things in high school, such as, you might be dating for the first time, which is what this class was trying to kind of emulate. You might be learning how to drive for the first time. You're getting ready to live away from your parents for the first time ever. Um, and so this whole time you're kind of being, um, I guess, you're what kind of you're kind of being judged for things like, we don't have a whole lot of real world experience in high school. We're all kind of on the same boat. So um, we're constantly being judged for things like what we're going to get on our next test and stuff like that. So I think that, when your confidence is really dictated by like your test scores, that can really, you know, that's really the only defining factor between you and your peers. Um, so I don't know. That was just kind of like how I wanted to set this up. I wanted to talk about confidence and why it kind of uh, turned me off, because I always felt like confidence was sort of synonymous with arrogance in a way. And I think that like every time, this might just be in hindsight, but I remember this like during the time living in these moments, I felt like every time I was trying to be confident, um, I always kind of came off as arrogant. And I think this is because with confidence, I always felt like you needed to prove yourself with some sort of claim that, when we're in school, we're taught like we're being taught how to do like research, and you always need to have a good argument to back up what you need to say. Otherwise, what you're saying is just kind of fluffy. So I felt like in a circumstance where you had to demonstrate confidence in yourself, naturally there would be this opposing force that disagrees with you. So like, why would you have to, be confident if you weren't preparing yourself to be, to stand up for yourself, if that makes sense? So it became like confidence to me. My perspective of confidence is this matter of willpower, where it's like, is your voice gonna, be heard more than another person's voice? Otherwise, why are you gonna be confident? Um, so yeah, pretty much just preparing for the reason why we're confident, in my opinion, is that we're preparing to have to be adamant about some sort of stance. Um, is really what I'm, I guess, trying to say. And I think that it's an important detail to kind of establish this, because I guess when you look up the definition of confidence, um, a big part of it is you're trying to establish trust between you and other people. And I guess in school, when you learn about like persuasion, there's these three appeals that you're taught, which are ethos, pathos, and logos. And ethos is pretty much when you're trying to appeal to like the speaker's status or credibility. So, like for example, um, a doctor might have of medicine would have a lot more ethos in a context about medicine than I would. Um, or there's pathos, which is an appeal to the audience's emotions, which is a lot of times when you see those like adopt a dog thing and they show like the terrible conditions of the animal shelter. That's like a pathos argument because it's appealing to your emotions. And then there's the logos appeals, which are logical arguments, which are pretty much like kind of like I would describe it as like word math, where you're trying to like find the logic of 2 + 2 = 4, but with words instead of numbers. So like all birds or all owls are birds. That's just kind of like a logical deduction. All owls are birds. Um, but like especially like as a high schooler, it's really difficult to like establish yourself, as I was kind of talking about, with a lot of ethos, because you're all on the same page. It's pretty much your test scores against my test scores. That's how you kind of determine who's smarter in high school, I guess. Because you just lack that real world experience unless you like have a job. But even if you have a job, it's like, you know, no one really has a lot of real world experience in high school. So you can't really depend on ethos a lot. So then you're looking at pathos. And I feel like I personally don't really like relying on pathos because it feels very manipulative to me to really like try to play with other people's emotions when you're trying to, um, make arguments or um, communicate. So I tend to um, revolve, or I tend to try to establish a lot more logos in my arguments, so logical arguments, um, as this sort of key to navigating through the conflict of rhetorical discourse. And basically, like, um, I guess what I mean by that is just like in a conversation where there is this conflict, where I would be confident in myself, it would be more about me trying to prove to the other person using logical deductive reasoning that I'm correct and that's why they should trust me, as opposed to, um, you know, just planting my feet down and just being confident, if that makes sense, to try to complement my confidence with some sort of logical claim. So pretty much to summarize what I'm trying to say so far, I had this confidence problem growing up, and still probably I still do to some degree, but more so in high school, where I'm constantly being told that people find confidence attractive, and so what I tried to do how I interpreted this is that in order for people to trust me, I need to be confident. And because I lack ethos, I lack credibility as a high schooler, and I didn't want to manipulate people with pathos, my whole goal in high school, uh, there's probably other factors in there, but I remember around this time, I was trying to be very immaculate in my logic. And I think that this places a lot of pressure on people and myself, because I remember, a lot of this revolves around this idea of, because I'm trying to be logically sound and flawless, it's really detrimental if you make a mistake, because if you do make a mistake, then I equate that to people losing trust in your ability. And so not only is there a lot of pressure to, I guess, double down on your logic, and because if you make a mistake, that can be very crippling towards, I guess, your reputation as someone who's valuing their own logical thought process. And we're humans, so no one's ever going to be 100% logically sound all the time. So I just remember that was kind of like a thing in my mind a lot. And so I think that, like, as you start to practice this sort of, like, flawless logic, um, and you're trying to come off as confident, you're really sort of, starting to come off more as arrogant instead. Um, and so that's kind of like the connection that I'm trying to build here between this confidence and this arrogance. And so in my mind, the steps to gain trust were confidence, and I thought that this meant that you have to be confident, you can't be illogical, and ultimately I'm kind of noticing this thing that when you're trying to be confident, you're essentially just becoming this stubborn roadblock. um, and I know that's not always the case, but really, like, um, if you're ever, like, kind of analyzing a situation where you're trying to be confident in something, it's always because of there's friction between you and another force, whether it's you're standing up for something you believe in, someone's bullying you and you have to show confidence, but you're kind of becoming this roadblock, whether it's for good or for bad. It's always um, seeking out situations where you're going to practice being confident. It's usually going to be a situation of conflict. Um, and so, like, because I was so dedicated to this idea of being perfect and this perfectionism kind of in logic, I started to learn that, like, even if you were going to, practice and, uh, you know, have a conversation with someone and be logical, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day how logical you are. You could be, you could have aced that test, not this metaphorical test of that, situation where you're having a conversation with someone. You could, be completely sound, completely perfect in your logic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are still going to agree with you, because uh, and that kind of poses a huge problem, because how do you really judge your own logical soundness if not everyone is going to practice trying to be logically sound? And this kind of probably is a bit confusing, but pretty much, like, you have to develop these strategies now to really, prove to yourself that you are logically sound, um, and kind of, like, kind of self-analyze, like, where did I go wrong in this conversation? What areas was I not logically sound in? Because, if people are still disagreeing with you, naturally, you aren't going to come out of that situation saying I played that perfectly. So what can you do to really, like, resolve that? And you can either approach that from two ways. You can either, like, look at this as like self-improvement thing, or you can be like, that person's just not logical and I'm just going to disregard everything they say. And I feel like both of these solutions are kind of not perfect in a way. They're both kind of unfortunate, uncomfortable situations, because if you're just self-analyzing yourself, you really don't have a proper key to really look at to determine where you went wrong. It's all kind of how you process it. So if you're in turn not processing it accurately, then you're just kind of digging yourself down into this hole of delusion in a way. Whereas if people are just disagreeing with you and they're not logically sound, and you, that kind of is bad too, because that's just an example in life that you're kind of now able to look back on at where humanity has kind of failed you. And so it's just kind of this, I feel, toxic mindset to be in, that I'm trying to articulate that it's a hard mindset to really kind of navigate. And the problem was that, I was trying to just gain this trust from people by focusing on just providing the sound logic. And the thing about that is that you can't force people to agree with you. And going back to the test scores, it's like you're given this closure all the time on test scores, like this was right, this was wrong. But when you navigate these conversations with people, there isn't really an answer key of who was right, who was wrong. You either go your separate ways and disagree with each other, or one person concedes. And this whole time, I guess I'm just kind of interpreting this confidence as just you know pretty much trying to forcefully get people to agree with you. And it kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. And I was under the impression, that if I were to commit to being confident, um, it was, on one hand, I was being told that it was this thing that people liked. Um, but if I was going to commit to being like confident, then I really had to be, 100% accuracy, logically sound. Um, and it was kind of like the lesser of two evils. I would rather try to uh, constantly try to self-analyze my mistakes, where I went wrong, to try to build this 100% worldview perspective, that I would never really get to 100%, but every day I would build my own holistic perspective of reality, and just try to constantly repair it to make it as sound as possible. And I was kind of using this as an internal means of me inevitably saying that I'm probably that, I mean, this isn't something I like agree with right now, but when you're constantly like doing that internally, you start to develop this kind of superiority complex, which leads to arrogance. And you know uh, because if the likelihood of other people not um, you know checking themselves and stuff like that, it's sort of this I mean, people could be doing it, but you start to develop, you spend so much time in your head doing it, that you can't really fathom that other people are checking themselves as much as you're checking yourself. So it's kind of this flawed perspective internally. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm sure if this could relate to someone. I don't know, but pretty much, like, if I was going to commit to being this confident, um, you know, and if ever, I guess I want to take a little step back. So going back to the whole 100% accuracy thing, if there was ever a person that I had a conversation with, and they were able to spot an error that I had in my conversation with them, then I had this fear that they could always look back on that example in life and go, well, you were wrong about this thing, so therefore why should I believe you about this other thing? And I don't know. I pretty much feel like this is kind of going into a very like spaghetti um, explanation of what um, you know confidence versus arrogance. But I think that if you kind of sift through the I guess sift through the kind of like the knots, and kind of unwind them and unravel them, you can kind of get what I'm trying to get at. But I don't know. we'll continue. During this time, I guess, in high school, I remember people used to always, not always, but, occasionally you'd have a conversation with people. And I feel like I developed this reputation for kind of being arrogant. And I do think that I was arrogant to, a degree. And I kind of want to, I think I've been talking about this a little bit, but there's kind of this paradox in trying to be confident without being arrogant. And they kind of go hand in hand. Like being arrogant means that you have this exaggerated perspective of yourself, and it often comes off as offensive to others. That's where it kind of differs from being confident. And people tend to not trust people who are arrogant simply because they are more fixated on that the fact that the arrogant person has this inflated ego, and that's just this turnoff. And it doesn't really matter how solid their foundation is. It's just kind of like this natural repulsion we have with people. And an example of this, I guess, Julie and I were watching this show called Blown Away on Netflix, and it's kind of like a cooking show, except instead of like any cooking show you see where they like cook a meal and it's judged, but instead of it being cooking, it's glass blowing. And there was this guy in season 2 named Chris Taylor, and he was like the first person they introduced, and the first thing he says is that I'm an extremely arrogant guy. And at first I was like, oh, well, at least he's honest about, his arrogance. But as you kind of watch the show, um, he's very, repulsing in his arrogance. Like he's constantly talking about how he's the most talented person there, how he's the only person that really deserves to win, that if the judges don't pick his thing, then he'd rather, as the best one, then he'd rather like just go home because it's not worth his time kind of thing. And so he is a respect, but the thing is, he is this respected member of the glassblowing community. Like he's like a professor level teacher who has taught some of these judges, who everyone kind of knows and regards as probably the most talented person there. So I guess my point in highlighting this example is that this is kind of an extreme case of arrogance. This is an example of someone who has picked a profession and has sort of rose to the top of being good at that profession. And I don't believe that, I was ever like this arrogant, but I would often try to validate my claims in a similar way where I would be like, and this is why you should kind of respect what it is I have to say, which is something that I feel like nobody really wants to hear, not even from a high tier glassblower. Even if you are respected, like you respect him for his talents, I feel like no one really ever wants to hear something like that, because no one ever wants to hear that they're behaving illogically, and it automatically just kind of builds this wall between you as the speaker and your audience. And it goes back to that whole Dunning-Kruger thing that I keep bringing up, where you're on Mount Stupid. And I think this is an interesting example because here you are. This is Chris Taylor, who is, definitely not on Mount Stupid. He is beyond that because he is very competent in what he does on a professional level, but here he is still kind of acting like he's on Mount Stupid. And I think we like associate like arrogance with people who have this they're limited in their ability um to identify what it is they know, even if they are extremely competent. Like there's no way I will ever know anything more about glass blowing than Chris Taylor does. Mostly because I don't, partake in the art of glass blowing, but even the amount of research I ever do will not compare to the amount of research and firsthand experience he has in glassblowing. But still, when he says things, it rubs me the wrong way, and I don't have this immediate trust in him um, because of this arrogance. And I think that it's interesting that I can still sort of identify this bias that I have. It's almost like the opposite of an argument from ignorance, where this guy is clearly more knowledgeable. Yeah, I am clearly not knowledgeable about anything, but it's still like this weird gap in trust, which I don't know how relevant that is, but I felt like it was good to kind of note. It kind of felt like it. Again, going back to that, like knots, if you kind of like, connect the dots somewhere, you can kind of make these connections that I'm just not able to articulate. But anyway, so like my dilemma here was, how do I demonstrate this confidence without coming off as arrogant? And I think it's a very challenging question, because there's this fine line of trying to show people that you're credible and trustworthy, but also trying to show humility and tact, um, regardless, if you're very knowledgeable or talented in a certain area of life. And I think that over the years, this has been a question that's very hard for me to define. And as this video is, going on, very difficult for me to articulate correctly. But I think that I would often find myself, over the years, just constantly feeling like I'm arrogant and feeling like, I'm not being understood, I'm being misunderstood by people. And how can I better communicate things to avoid, um, I guess, coming off as arrogant, stuff like that. And I would always just be like, oh, if only people could just like look into my mind, and like that would really, resolve the conflict. But, it's just a very complicated thing. And, you know, I think that not that this all stems from that class at school, but I just think that that was like the earliest point in time where I'm able to like look at a point in my life where like, why do I value people trusting me, and why do I value confidence, and why how does this relate to the whole arrogance thing? So I think that's like one of the just one of the places where that kind of originated. um and I don't know if I've figured this whole thing out yet. This is still something I'm continuously trying to, um I guess, improve in my life. But I think there's two things that I've kind of learned from this. I think the first thing is that I feel like it's kind of a curse to try to be the best at something. Because I guess if your goal is to use this talent of yours that you're the best at to be admired by others, then I don't think that the amount of time or energy it takes to master something um, really is comprehensible by other people who are not also trying to master the same thing that you are. I feel like when you're trying to master something, it's almost creating a divide between you and a common person, because people might, it's definitely cool to be like, oh wow, that person accomplished something really amazing, but you're only really thinking that about that person for like, a couple minutes. You and then your mind goes to other things, whereas this person probably spent years of their life really, trying to hone their skills and perfect this thing. And it's just something that that person, as the person who hasn't gone through that process, will never really understand um, the amount of work it took to go into that. They could probably like empathize with, understand, but to actually go through it and do it yourself, it's very uh, hard to really grasp, I think. And so what I'm trying to say here is that I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't go out and master skills. If you like doing something, you really want to master something, you should do it. But I think that if you're trying to, use this thing as an anchor to define who you are, and for this is kind of going back to me trying to, be very logical. If you don't get the connection, I'm trying to, make a connection between me trying to master logic. Um, so going back to where I am now, if you're trying to use this kind of thing that you're trying to master as an anchor to define you, I think that you're essentially pushing more people away than you are actually impressing them. So I wasn't actually impressing anyone with trying to be super logical. I was more pushing people away, because I was getting disappointed that other people weren't at the same doing the same thing that I was doing, if that makes sense. And that was the cause of the arrogance. Also, if you're defining yourself based on something such as, being the best at something, I noticed that there's also this competitive mindset that you start to develop. And you start to develop this fear of losing such a high status. So if you ever come across someone who is, more skilled at you in that thing that you're trying to master, then you kind of naturally have a more competitive mindset with them of like who's actually better, me or that person. And if someone is ever, you start to see more and more people start to become better than you at that one thing, then this revelation can be kind of shattering. So if you're kind of like a big fish in a small pond, and then you go to the ocean for the first time and you're like, wow, I am, this whole thing that I established my life around, my kind of what I define myself as, and I'm not even that good at it. It can be kind of a shattering revelation, I guess. And so that was the first thing. Sorry, this is kind of like long and kind of unorganized, but sorry. The second thing, and there's only two, but the second thing is I found that the better way, instead of looking at confidence as a way to have people trust me, I found that it's better to be more a team player than to try to be the captain of the team, if that makes sense. So an example is like, if you're ever met in a situation where you have to, show confidence. For me, I've found that it's better to try to be more supportive than to be more of a role model, a steward, if that makes sense. So I think that, for example, in a more like debate oriented situation, which is where I kind of was getting a lot of my logical rhetoric kind of debate stuff from. I think it's more beneficial in this sort of context to try to understand the other person's perspective a bit more than to try to prove them wrong with logic, if that makes sense. So I think that if you're constantly focused on allowing the other person to speak, allowing that person to, um, you know, say what's on their mind, and then you're not really immediately attacking it. It kind of gives you more information about how this conversation would go. So if this is a person who, they recognize that they're speaking a lot and they're now interested in what you have to say, that gives you the invitation to really talk about your perspective. And if you're talking about your perspective, they're probably more inclined to listen to it because they just sat there for 10 minutes talking about what they like. So they might be more inclined to be more, and if you showed them good grace, they will probably be more inclined to show you good grace in return. So that's the better case scenario. The other case scenario is if that person just doesn't realize that they're talking for 10 minutes and they don't even give you the time of day to give your perspective, then that should just, instead of saying, wow, this person kind of is like, not let me speak, um, probably the better kind of, at least in my opinion, the better kind of thought to have if you ever come across someone like that is like, it's good I didn't waste my breath talking to them because nothing I would have said would have really resonated with them if they are only interested in talking about themselves, if that makes sense. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this is just kind of like a new strategy I've been trying to implement as opposed to trying to be, super logical. I think it might be better to just try to be super supportive and listening, and then kind of pick your um, pick your moments where the situation demands more logic. And ultimately, I think this is less pressure on me, which is really nice. I'm not constantly like having to reassess debates. Um, it's nice to, end an argument without thinking about it for hours later. So I don't know. That's just kind of a strategy I've been implementing. If you have a similar thing in your life where you feel like people don't listen to you when you debate, I think that that's a good strategy to sort of try to just listen. And if people want to hear what you have to say after you're listening to them, then it's good to kind of talk cordially about it. Um, but yeah, those are just two things. I think ultimately, I just wanted to make this video to sort of define this fine line between confidence and arrogance. I think that, I still struggle to demonstrate confidence. As you can probably tell with a lot of these videos, I'm always like, I don't know, this is just my opinion, but, I'm not really super like set in stone in what I want Um, I think that there's just a lot of different ways of that this information could be interpreted, and I guess I just really care more about being mindful of what I'm trying to say and how it could be interpreted rather than trying to solidify a confidence in my presence. But ultimately, I'm trying not to come off as arrogant as much. So that's kind of a thing. And then I found myself trying to be, more in this supportive kind of role mindset where it's more about kind of like observing as it is trying to be um, a contributor. So just kind of observing, seeing, analyzing in the moment as opposed to really trying to, force my opinions onto others, if that makes sense. And especially if the goal is to build trust with other people, I think that giving other people chances at the spotlight is just, everyone kind of wants to feel like they're being heard. So I think, trying to let other people have that chance to be heard is definitely a better way for me to, or I've seen more results in building trust with other people following that kind of process. And I don't think it's like manipulative in any way because you're while you have something that you want out of this, it's not really like you're taking away someone else's agency to get what you want. It's more you're trying to get what you want by giving other people agency. So it's a very cooperative mindset as opposed to a competitive mindset. And I think that's why it's kind of more healthy. But that's, just my opinion. And yeah, pretty much, uh, that was kind of like the last thing, just this difference between a cooperative mindset and a competitive mindset. I think that a cooperative mindset is just generally I mean, I could be wrong. This is just proving my own lack of confidence, but I think generally, like having more of a, it's weird saying this because defining yourself by like this logical mindset, it feels weird to kind of like um try to adopt this more like cooperative mindset of, we need to work together. It feels a bit more like too rooted in emotion, but I actually think that like there is a logic behind trying to be more cooperative with people as opposed to competitive. Um, but yeah, that's kind of just the moral, I guess, just trying to be more cooperative than competitive. And yeah, so that's all I really got. It's 37, 38 minutes in, but just a few more videos until we get to the 100 videos, complete the challenge. Again, these are all just thoughts I have. You know, Nothing that is really me trying to tell you how to live your life. It's just, I'm not an educator. I'm just another guy with thoughts and trying to navigate life like everyone else. So, have a good rest of your day. I'll catch you next time. And yeah, if you're watching these in order, that's great. I really appreciate it. But if this is just the one you want to watch, that's fine too. Have a good day and catch you next time. See ya.